Hello, welcome to Hunger Code, a channel about what happens to the human brain when food stops being food and becomes manipulation. You open a bag just to have a little. You weren't really hungry, it was more of a habit, that thing you do while watching TV, while working, while you're not really doing anything in particular. But at some point you realized you'd eaten way more than you intended. It wasn't a decision. It was like your hand moved on its own. And the strangest part, it wasn't even that enjoyable. You weren't hungry before, you didn't feel satisfied after, but the bag emptied. This happens to you always with the same type of product. Always, there is a reason for this, and it's not your fault. In fact, this has nothing to do with you. At some point in history, the food industry hired mathematicians, not nutritionists, not chefs, but mathematicians and behavioral scientists and taste psychologists to solve a very specific problem: how to make a product the human brain would never consider enough. And they solved it. What they found has a name. Inside the industry, it's used all the time. In meetings, in laboratories, in internal reports. Outside the industry, almost no one knows it exists. It's a number inside a formula. A precise point of sugar, fat, or salt at which the brain stops calculating and just starts wanting more. Below the number, the product doesn't hook. Above it, it becomes too much. Right at the point the consumer doesn't stop, that number is inside every product you can't put down. In 2004, an American beverage company was losing ground to competitors. They had the product, they had distribution, they had marketing budget. What they didn't have was a formula that made consumers want more, so they hired a mathematician holding a doctorate in experimental psychology from a renowned American university. He didn't develop new products, he calculated them. His specialty was finding the exact point of sugar, fat, or salt at which a product stops being merely good and becomes impossible to put down. He called it optimization. Inside the industry, that point has another name, the Bliss point. The idea behind the concept is simple and disturbing. For any ingredient in any food, there is a curve. Too little sweetness and the product doesn't hook. Too much sweetness and it becomes overwhelming. But there is a point in the middle of that curve, a specific number, where pleasure is at its peak and fullness never comes. That's where the brain stops calculating, stops reasoning, and just starts wanting more. That number is not intuitive. It's not what tastes best on the first bite. It's what makes you reach for the second, the third, the 10th, without even realizing you're doing it. And it can be calculated. To find it, this mathematician would create dozens of versions of the same product, each one with a slightly different amount of one ingredient. These versions would go to groups of paid consumers to taste and rate. The data would come back to the computer, and from there the math did the rest. Statistical analysis, cross-referencing variables, until the number emerged. In the case of the soft drink, the research team developed 61 different formulas, varying the sugar flavorings in tiny doses with each version. Consumers across the country participated in taste tests. The result was a product that dominated store shelves and helped value the company at over $11 billion. But what was done for one soft drink was also applied to soups, pizzas, salad dressings, canned goods. Every major player in the food industry came to this mathematician to implement the magic formula in their products. Now, pause for a second, because what is being described here is not marketing, not packaging, not advertising. It is the reformulation of the product itself, the amount of a specific ingredient inside what you eat, calculated specifically so that your brain never receives the signal to stop. And this didn't happen only with soft drinks and chips. It happened in yogurt, in ketchup, in sandwich bread, in products you buy every week with no suspicion whatsoever that the amount you consume was decided before you ever walked into the supermarket. and not through a simple recipe composition, but as an agent of manipulation of your brain. To understand why this calculation works so well, a research institute tested young subjects to measure each one's bliss point for sugar. The test was simple. They tasted versions of the same pudding at different sweetness levels and pointed to what they preferred. Each choice determined the next pair until the number emerged. One of the subjects tested was 6 years old. Her bliss point for sugar in the pudding landed at 24% sugar concentration, double what most adults can tolerate, and she was average for her age group. Some reached 36%. The researcher in charge of the study was direct. Companies that make products for this age group know this number, and they use that knowledge to calibrate their breakfast cereals, their drinks, their snacks, not to match what young people naturally enjoy, but to teach the brain from the very beginning how much sugar food is supposed to have. This is not an accident. It is engineering. There is one detail in this story that cannot be ignored. The bliss point can be calculated with the same precision used to measure protein, fiber, or calcium in a food. That statement doesn't come from a critic of the industry. It comes from one of the scientists who presented the concept at an international conference of food manufacturers. And he completed his reasoning with an observation that was recorded. This number is probably not something companies will want to put on their labels. And they didn't. The bliss point has never appeared on any packaging. No manufacturer has ever been required to disclose that their product was formulated to hit the exact point where the brain stops resisting. While calories, sodium, and saturated fat were progressively regulated and displayed, the mechanism that determines how much you consume remained invisible. A scientist who spent decades inside one of the world's largest snack food manufacturers summed up what he knew in one sentence, already retired, leafing through the internal memos he had kept for 30 years. "I feel very sorry for the consumer, not for the product, not for the company. For the consumer, that bag you opened without thinking, that amount that went beyond what you intended, that was not a lack of control. It was the number doing exactly what it was calculated to do." There is one detail in this story that almost no one knows. The bliss point was not invented by the food industry. The research that mapped the exact point of pleasure in the human palate was funded by the United States Army, decades before it ever reached supermarket shelves. The problem the military wanted to solve was completely different. Soldiers in the field were throwing away their rations. There is one detail in this story that almost no one knows. The bliss point was not invented by the food industry. The research that mapped the exact point of pleasure in the human palate was funded by the United States Army, decades before it ever reached supermarket shelves. The problem the military wanted to solve was completely different. Soldiers in the field were throwing away their rations, not because the food was bad, but because eating the same thing every day dulled the pleasure. The Army wanted to understand how to keep appetite active under extreme conditions. The food industry had the opposite problem. It wanted the consumer to never reach the point of switching off. Two problems. The same discovery. Completely different destinations. What this video leaves you with is not a list of products to avoid, not a plan. It's a perception, and perceptions don't go away. The next time you open something and realize you went further than you intended, you'll know that says nothing about you. It says something about the number that was put inside it. If this kind of investigation makes sense to you, what the industry did, how it did it, and what happens inside the brain when you eat, this channel was built for exactly that. If this video brought you something you didn't expect, sharing it is the most direct way to get this information to the people who also deserve to know. A like helps this content reach more people. Subscribing and turning on notifications makes sure the next one finds you. Thank you for watching.